Can the face you desire also be the face of danger? Leviticus makes intimacy frightening without turning queer desire into a tidy monster metaphor. Its entity weaponizes the image of what someone wants, so attraction becomes a place fear can enter. That's a brilliant, genuinely nasty idea. The feelings are haunting, but the plot can't always find its way home, leaving emotional power trapped inside narrative confusion. And that's the tension I want to follow here. Leviticus is psychological supernatural horror fused with a queer coming-of-age drama and a religious family melodrama, putting the withdrawn, dark-haired young man, the blonde boy he desires, and their concealed, inconsistent intimacy in the same pressure cooker as shame, religious intervention, and parental protection. The church community presents itself as healing, but it could be another machine for judgment. The question isn't whether the film explains everything. It's whether its ambiguity feels designed or merely confusing. This isn't primarily a monster movie. It's about what happens when nobody can agree what fear means, when attraction, silence, and protection all become arguments. You may care about what these young men feel while struggling to understand what literally happened. That gap is the review. After relocating to an isolated town, the dark-haired young man moves through school corridors, empty roads, industrial spaces, and a family home that never quite feels like his. He finds an uneasy connection with the blonde young man, close in private, avoidant in public, as if affection becomes dangerous the second somebody else might see it. That split matters because the film makes desire both a refuge and a threat before it ever gives us a monster. At a religious gathering, the adults stage a ceremony as if fear can be corrected through performance, prayer, and obedience. The young person at its center rejects that logic outright, calling it a ritual for gullible assholes. It's a funny line only for a second. Underneath it is a serious refusal to let parents and religious authorities rename distress as sin. Here, protection already looks suspicious. Help arrives carrying demands for silence and submission. Then, Hunter reports that a presence visits him every night, throws things, and killed someone. When he asks why nobody believes him, then breaks down crying, that thing killed him. The film turns private fear into a problem nobody can agree how to interpret. Is this psychological denial, religious intervention gone wrong, or a literal supernatural threat? Each explanation changes who the protector is and who becomes another danger. The hospital informant offers the most unsettling rule yet. The entity takes the form of the person its victim is most into. That makes attraction the doorway through which terror enters, and it gives the story its sharpest idea. But don't mistake a rule for an explanation. The film never makes this pattern comfortably reliable. Identities blur, accounts conflict, and you can care deeply about what these young men feel, while still struggling to know what literally happened. And that's the screenplay's best decision. The entity isn't a generic creature wandering in from another movie. It attacks the characters through the face of the person they desire, turning attraction, recognition, and the need to be close into possible sources of terror. That gives the supernatural premise an emotional target, because the danger grows out of the exact feelings these young men are already trying to hide. The strongest dramatic engine, though, isn't the monster. It's the argument over whether anyone will believe the people in danger. At 35 minutes, the investigator says people deny painful truths and replace them with another story. That idea collides with Hunter insisting the threat is coming for Ryan, while the adults keep translating fear into illness, indecency, or a problem to be managed. Even the hospital explanation at 46 minutes, that the entity follows attraction, sharpens the conflict. The characters are asking to be heard, and authority keeps deciding what their fear means for them. And then, the screenplay makes disclosure feel like betrayal. He tells people about the blonde young man and Hunter because he's frightened, not because he has some clean plan to expose anyone, and that matters. His guilt isn't the simple guilt of a victim who did nothing wrong. At 1 hour, 8 minutes, the apology finally breaks through the fog, especially when he admits he was scared of how he felt. That's the emotional turning point, because the film states its central conflict plainly. Desire is frightening, but hiding it can hurt other people too. But the screenplay keeps confusing mystery with missing orientation. Is Ryan the blonde young man a separate person or an identity the entity borrows? The uncertainty around Brian, Hunter, Ryan, and the ritual figures doesn't just make the story cryptic, it weakens cause and effect, because you can't fully measure guilt or danger when the relationships themselves keep changing shape. Emotional curiosity survives. You care what these people feel, but narrative curiosity starts asking for a map, and the film keeps handing you another locked door. That's the frustrating part. Leviticus has a strong emotional spine. Fear drives attraction, disclosure, judgment, protection, and the demand to stay near other people, which is why the apology lands harder than most of the mythology. But its narrative map is unreliable. The screenplay knows exactly where the wound is. It just doesn't always show us how the characters got there, or who is standing beside them when the lights go out. The dark-haired young man is one of those performances that makes repression physical. His shoulders stay guarded, his eyes lock into place, and even his anger feels defensive, like he's attacking before anybody can get close enough to see what he's protecting. When the blonde boy asks, "Is there anything you're not afraid of?" the question hits because the answer is basically everything. But gradually that rigid anger gives way to something more direct and painfully vulnerable. That movement is clearest in the apology at 1 hour, 8 minutes, 18 seconds. It works because the film doesn't treat shame as harmless or private. His fear of his feelings leads him to expose somebody else, and that disclosure deepens the damage. So when he finally confesses, he's not asking to be declared innocent. He's admitting that fear made him cruel, which gives the scene a moral weight the supernatural mythology often struggles to find. The blonde young man is almost the reverse. Physically confident, comfortable taking up space, and much harder to read emotionally. Watch the difference between the bus intimacy and the way the boys behave around school peers. In private, he allows closeness. In public, he can ignore the protagonist as if their connection doesn't exist. That contradiction feels truthful to the fear around them, but the script doesn't always develop it into a clear relationship. So the actor has to supply the emotional logic himself. And he gets flashes of vulnerability that make the uncertainty more frustrating. The bus scene lets his confidence soften, while the image behind the mesh-covered doorway and the blood across his face suggest fear without telling us exactly what we're seeing. Is this a person in danger, an apparition, or a desire being weaponized? The performance keeps him emotionally present, even while his identity and fate remain maddeningly unclear. The mother is more complicated than a straightforward villain, and the film is right to make her concern real. She wants to protect her son, but protection here keeps arriving as questioning, denial, and outside authority, asking him to accept somebody else's explanation of his fear. Near the final confrontation, without getting into what follows, she admits she can't help him. That lands because her control has finally collapsed into the same panic she's been trying to manage. The religious speaker understands that calmness can be more frightening than fury. The measured delivery moves from God's love and free choice to indecency, judgment, and fire without changing its temperature, making the cruelty feel institutional rather than melodramatic. That's the performance paradox at the heart of Leviticus. These actors give the relationship shape, while the script sometimes refuses to tell us exactly who those relationships belong to. You care deeply about what they feel, even when the story won't reliably explain what literally happened. And that shape comes from the direction. Leviticus keeps turning ordinary spaces into emotional traps. The bus, the hospital, the workshop, the church hall, the takeaway near closing time, even home. None of them feels safely ordinary because every place where people are meant to gather also becomes a place where they can be watched, judged, cornered, or abandoned. The film's opening teal star-like network gives you that idea before the story can explain it. Remember that early feeling. The characters are visible but never fully reachable. The film builds it through mesh-covered doorways, glass, fences, door frames, vehicle interiors, and whatever happens to sit in the foreground between one person and another. Its cool teal, blue-gray, and green-gray images make private unease feel cold and enclosed, while warm dusk and amber religious interiors belong to collective ritual. Even the framing keeps that split alive. Negative space makes isolation physical. Then close-ups arrive when fear, injury, or confession finally breaks through. The editing works the same way. This isn't clean chronology so much as associative montage, linking baths, workshops, bands, churches, roads, hospitals, buses, industrial rooms, and domestic spaces through repeated images of thresholds, ritual, and bodily threat. A cut doesn't always tell you what happened next. Sometimes it tells you what one fear feels like when it changes location. That's powerful atmosphere. But when the connections involve character identity or cause, the film stops creating mystery and starts making you do filing work. The sound design gives that fragmentation a real pulse. Devotional singing, biblical language, and the chapter 2 chant invoking judgment and fire turn faith into pressure, not comfort. Then the film strips the sound back. Silence, ambient transit noise, closing time announcements, and voices arriving in broken pieces. That movement matters because fear becomes the shared language here. Whether someone is praying, confessing, demanding reassurance, or trying to keep another person close. And this is where the film's ambiguity needs separating. The injured blonde young man against the pale tiled wall is productive uncertainty. The image is clear, but its emotional meaning keeps shifting. You can feel shock, desire, guilt, and danger colliding in one frame. The frustrating uncertainty is different. Too often you aren't sure whether you've seen an event, a memory, or a vision, and the film hasn't given the characters enough definition to anchor that question. Its visual grammar is remarkably clear, its story mechanics aren't. The entity's relationship to attraction is the film's best idea, because the horror grows out of intimacy instead of barging in from outside. At the hospital, the warning is simple. It takes the form of the person someone is most attracted to. So the desired person becomes both refuge and liability. You can't run toward the face that makes you feel safe, when that same face might be the trap. Fear doesn't cancel desire. And that contamination gives the religious material real bite. The ceremony starts with soft language about God's love and free choice, reassurance made to sound voluntary. But once the young person resists, the tone hardens. Desire becomes indecency, disagreement becomes judgment, and the room fills with fire. That's coercion working through manners first, then threats. The mother complicates the protection theme. She genuinely wants safety, and her attempt to reach the deliverance healer comes from fear, not cruelty. But protection built on secrecy and outside authority leaves her son less able to name what's happening, while everyone around him learns to doubt him. Her love is real, so is the damage it helps create. That tension runs through the public spaces. The bus offers a fragile refuge, because other people are nearby, and the shop briefly makes isolation feel less absolute. But when the church organizes fear, community stops being shelter and becomes judgment. Hunter's desperate question, why doesn't anybody believe him, lands because disbelief is another danger pressing into the room. Leviticus grips hardest when desire, disbelief, and immediate danger occupy the same scene, when these characters are visible but never fully reachable. The problem is that Leviticus keeps emotional curiosity alive while repeatedly dropping narrative curiosity. You care about what these people feel, the desire, shame, panic, and guilt, but you can't reliably tell whether Ryan is the blonde young man, a separate person, or another identity in the entity's orbit. The same instability hangs over Hunter and Brian, and it makes the guilt around Hunter's fate impossible to properly measure. Mystery needs uncertainty, not confusion. The supernatural rules don't rescue the story. Characters describe them, but the film rarely demonstrates them clearly enough to turn those descriptions into useful dramatic rules. Is isolation what triggers the entity? Do crowds actually protect anyone? When the blonde young man appears bloodied, or when the protagonist's body shows signs of violence, are those injuries literal, remembered, or visionary? The film keeps all three possibilities open, but doesn't give the uncertainty enough structure to create suspense. And then there's the unnamed deliverance healer, who should be the missing hinge between religion, family failure, and supernatural harm. Instead, he stays so indistinct that the central accusation can't fully land. Did he cause the danger, exploit it, or simply misunderstand what was happening? Leviticus wants his religious intervention to feel consequential, but consequence requires a connection between action and result. Here, that connection is mostly smoke. The pacing suffers from the same problem. The opening spends too long building atmosphere before Hunter's sustained report gives us a narrative foothold at around 31 minutes. And the investigation later circles its mysteries instead of advancing them. The takeaway near closing time slows the momentum again before the final stretch, when the film should be concentrating everything it has. The core criticism is simple. Mystery needs withheld answers, not withheld basic orientation. The film's sharpest thematic move is making desire feel dangerous before the entity ever arrives. The protagonist says he was scared of how he felt about the blonde young man. And that confession matters because shame has already made intimacy feel haunted. The supernatural premise simply gives that fear a face. That same suspicion falls on protection. His mother and the religious authorities insist they're keeping these young men safe, but safety comes with terms. Be silent, submit, or accept a different explanation for what you're experiencing. The ritual's language turns resistance and desire into indecency, so help starts looking less like shelter and more like control. And disbelief becomes an active kind of violence. Hunter doesn't merely get ignored when he asks why nobody believes him. He's pressured to become calmer, clearer, and more acceptable before his fear can count as evidence. That's how the film understands social isolation, not just being left alone, but being edited by other people until your account sounds safe to them. The clearest version of that pressure comes from the gap between school and private life. The boys can move through public space as if nothing is happening, then find a fragile honesty when nobody else is watching. And the protagonist's disclosure, followed by his apology, is crucial. Shame doesn't only isolate its immediate target, it can produce fear-driven betrayal, hurting the person you wanted close. Fear is the language everyone shares here. Attraction, confession, religious judgment, family panic, even the need to stay near other people all speak through it. A brief spoiler for the film's final exchange. The mother's claim that fear is necessary for survival doesn't solve anything. It reveals the trap. Solitude is dangerous, but community can weaponize judgment. So there is no clean, safe space, only people trying, badly, not to face terror alone. Before I get into the ending, there are mild spoilers for the confrontation. Emotionally, it works. The mother finally admits that her promised protection has failed, and that she can't save her son. It's devastating because the film has spent so long treating protection as another form of control. For one moment, fear stops pretending to be wisdom. But narratively, the film doesn't earn the uncertainty that follows. The entity, the healer, Ryan's condition, and the protagonist's fate remain unresolved, without enough structure to make that fog feel designed. Leviticus knows exactly how to frame entrapment, through glass, doorways, and bodies boxed into narrow spaces, but it doesn't always know how to organize the people trapped inside it. Its visual clarity is stronger than its narrative clarity. And that's the final judgment. This is a visually sharp, queer ghost story where the feelings are haunting, even when the plot can't find its way home. If you enjoy psychologically murky horror, queer coming-of-age drama, religious melodrama, and supernatural interpretations that refuse to settle, it's worth a watch. But if you need clear character identities, firm mythology, regular scares, or a conventional payoff, this will test your patience. And that's where Leviticus leaves its sharpest contradiction. The face that offers comfort may also be the face of danger, but the bigger danger may be the authorities deciding what that face means for you. Did its ambiguity feel haunting or just unfinished? Tell me whether you read the entity literally, psychologically, or as both at once. Because for all its narrative confusion, Leviticus understands something brutally well. Fear doesn't just isolate people. It teaches them to mistrust the very intimacy that might save them.